Piaget also says, and this is part of the constructivist notion, because constructivism is a philosophical school, he says, knowledge does not begin in the I, and it does not begin in the object. It begins in the interactions. There's a reciprocal and simultaneous construction of the subject on the one hand and the object on the other. There is no structure apart from construction, either abstract or genetic. I really like that. I showed you some of the symbolic categories in a couple of previous lectures, and I mentioned, for example, that one of the symbolic categories is the Great Father. And the Great Father kind of stands for cultural structure, whereas the Great Mother stands for novelty and sometimes the terrifying. Anyways, back to the Great Father. There's a precondition in constructivism that there has to be three things that exist, and they map right onto that symbolic structure. One is culture. So when you look at something, or really when any creature looks at something, there's an inbuilt structure that characterizes the creature, some of which would be biological, built in, and some of which would be acquired, that they must have in order to structure their perceptions of what they're looking at. So you don't come to the situation blank. For example, you have two eyes, so you're going to have stereo vision most of the time. And you have five senses, and they're the same senses. And there's more than that. You have snake detection circuits, for example, so you're sort of primed to respond to a certain class of predators. And you like sweet tastes and sour tastes, but you don't really like bitter tastes, and so on and so forth. Like, right from the beginning, you bring a landscape of interpretive structures in order to frame and simplify the world that you are exposed to. Now, the world itself is this sort of amorphous thing. It's amorphous because it's so multidimensional and complex. There's so much of it. It's like a fog that contains everything. And so unless you can frame that and simplify it and narrow it, it's very difficult for you to understand and interact with it at all. I mean, you just can't deal with everything at once. It's hard enough to deal with one little thing at a time. And this internal structure is partly what enables you to deal with one little thing at a time. And then, so there's you, and there's the source of all information. There's the structure of you and the source of all information. And then there's the process that's you. And the process that's you is you using your appendages, fundamentally, and your senses to interact with things and to make them manifest new properties, right? And so those are properties that they might not manifest without you there. And it's very difficult for you to tell when you're interacting with the world, even at a perceptual level, how much what you observe wouldn't be there if you weren't there. Now, because one of the big philosophical questions is, well, what's there when you're not there? And that is a much more complicated question than you might imagine. The Taoists would say, well, what's there is so much an amalgam of everything at once that it might as well be nothing at all. And it's sort of I can give you a way of understanding that. So let's say you took every symphony that was ever written, recorded, okay? And then you took all those recordings together and you laid one on top of the other. And you'd say, well, now I've got like every symphony at once on a tape, and then you played the tape. What would it sound like? It would sound like white noise. It would sound like shh. And so you could say white noise is functionally equivalent to every single symphony that's ever been written, every piece of music that's ever been written, all being played at once. Well, so what? So and the Taoists would also say, you have to remember that what something is just as dependent on what it isn't as it is dependent on what it is. So that's a tough one, but it's very, very smart. So the constructivists would certainly agree with that.